Hi, this is Mahavan Das. Welcome to Simple Gita, Chapter 9. This chapter is entitled The Most Confidential Knowledge. Let's take a look at the connection between it and the previous chapter. Krishna has explained in the 8th chapter that a pure Bhakti yogi surpasses all material conditions by constant remembrance of him and attains the highest perfection, his eternal abode, which is free from the miseries of material existence. In Chapter 9, he explains how to become such a devotee. Here's our overview of Chapter 9. Chapter 9 shares various themes with Chapter 7. Hearing about Krishna, Krishna's energies, his all-pervasiveness in and relationship to the material world, demigod worship versus Krishna worship, and comparing impersonalists and devotees in understanding Krishna. The flow of thought and concepts discussed in both chapters are similar, but in Chapter 9, Krishna discusses them in more depth. Just as he described Karma Yoga in Chapter 3 and then elaborated on it in Chapter 5, he discusses Bhakti Yoga in Chapter 7 and elaborates on it further in Chapter 9. Let's take a look at the first verse and purport for this chapter from Bhagavad Gita as it is. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, "My dear Arjuna, because you are never envious of me, I shall impart to you this most confidential knowledge and realization, knowing which you shall be relieved of the miseries of material existence." Srila Prabhupada's purport. As a devotee hears more and more about the Supreme Lord, he becomes enlightened. This hearing process is recommended in the Srimad Bhagavatam. Srimad Bhagavatam is the graduate study to Bhagavad Gita. The messages of the Supreme Personality of Godhead are full of potencies, and these potencies can be realized if topics regarding the Supreme Godhead are discussed amongst devotees. This cannot be achieved by the association of mental speculators or academic scholars, for it is realized knowledge. The devotees are constantly engaged in the Supreme Lord's service. The Lord understands the mentality and sincerity of a particular living entity who is engaged in Krishna consciousness and gives him the intelligence to understand the science of Krishna in the association of devotees. Discussion of Krishna is very potent, and if a fortunate person has such association and tries to assimilate the knowledge, then he will surely make advancement towards spiritual realization. Lord Krishna, in order to encourage Arjuna to higher and higher elevation in his potent service, describes in this 9th chapter matters more confidential than any he has already disclosed. The very beginning of the Bhagavad Gita, the first chapter, is more or less an introduction to the rest of the book. And in the 2nd and 3rd chapters, the spiritual knowledge described is called confidential. Topics discussed in the 7th and 8th chapters are specifically related to devotional service, and because they bring enlightenment in Krishna consciousness, they are called more confidential. But the matters which are described in the 9th chapter deal with unalloyed pure devotion. Therefore, this is called the most confidential. One who is situated in this most confidential knowledge of Krishna is naturally transcendental. He therefore has no material pangs, although he is in the material world. In the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, it is said that although one who has a sincere desire to render loving service to the Supreme Lord is situated in the conditional state of material existence, he is to be considered liberated. Similarly, we shall find in the Bhagavad Gita, 10th chapter, that anyone who is engaged in that way is a liberated person. Now, this first verse has specific significance. The words idam jnanam, this knowledge, refer to pure devotional service, which consists of 9 different activities: hearing, chanting, remembering, serving, worshipping, praying, obeying, maintaining friendship, and surrendering everything. By the practice of these 9 elements of devotional service, one is elevated to spiritual consciousness, Krishna consciousness. When one's heart is thus cleared of material contamination, one can understand this science of Krishna. Simply to understand that a living entity is not material is not sufficient. That may be the beginning of spiritual realization, but one should recognize the difference between the activities of the body and the spiritual activities of one who understands that he is not the body. In the 7th chapter, we have already discussed the opulent potency of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, his different energies, the inferior and superior natures, and all this material manifestation. Now, in chapter 9, the glories of the Lord will be delineated. The Sanskrit word anasuyave in this verse is also very significant. Generally, the commentators, even if they are highly scholarly, are all envious of Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Even the most erudite scholars write on Bhagavad Gita very inaccurately. Because they are envious of Krishna, their commentaries are useless. The commentaries given by devotees of the Lord are bona fide. No one can explain Bhagavad Gita or give perfect knowledge of Krishna if he is envious. One who criticizes the character of Krishna without knowing him is a fool, so such commentaries should be very carefully avoided. For one who understands that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the pure and transcendental personality, these chapters will be very beneficial. Let's go over the key points here in chapter 9. The first key point is Krishna glorifying the knowledge that he's about to reveal in this chapter. This knowledge of Bhakti Yoga is the most confidential because it goes beyond understanding that we are spiritual entities, not our material body, by explaining the activities of the spirit soul in perfection. Srila Prabhupada explained in the purport, simply to understand that a living entity is not material is not sufficient. That may be the beginning of spiritual realization, but one should recognize the difference between the activities of the body and the activities of one who understands that he is not the body. So this knowledge of Bhakti Yoga, the most confidential knowledge, consists of 9 main activities. Those are the main activities of one who understands that he is not the body. These transcendental processes purify the consciousness of the practitioner from ignorance of all varieties, allowing the practitioner to realize the science of Krishna. Now, what is the qualification to have this kind of realization of Krishna? As Krishna explains in this first verse, it is to be unenvious. This is Arjuna's qualification for hearing this most confidential knowledge and receiving the realization of that knowledge. Why is that Arjuna's qualification? Naturally, if we're envious of someone, we can't correctly perceive the person. Our psychological disposition just blocks correct perception of who that person is, what their motivations are, etc. But when we love a person, then we can actually understand them in truth. And one reason for that is because we only reveal ourselves to those who love us. That is true for us as ordinary people, and it is true for Krishna, the Supreme Person. He reveals himself to Arjuna, as he explained in the 4th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, because Arjuna is his devotee and Arjuna is his friend. In other words, he loves Krishna. He's not envious. And therefore Krishna agrees to reveal himself to Arjuna because of these qualifications. Krishna also explains in this first section of the chapter that this most confidential knowledge is the king of all knowledge. It's the king of all education, the greatest education that one can receive. It's the most secret of all secrets. It's the purest form of knowledge. And it gives direct experience of the self, and it's eternal, and it's joyfully performed. So these are some of the qualities of the knowledge in this chapter. So Krishna is giving us some encouragement here at the beginning of the chapter to keep reading. Now, This chapter answers the essential question for any serious spiritual aspirant. What do you do when you're spiritual? Because we generally don't have this most confidential knowledge of the activities of the soul in perfection, we're not attracted to spiritual pursuits, particularly because we're pleasure-seeking by nature, and pleasure ultimately exists in relationships. If we don't understand spiritual relationships, the activities of the spirit soul in relation to the Supreme Soul, then we're not going to be very motivated to practice spiritual life. So Krishna gives us that most confidential knowledge in this chapter. Basically, he explains that Bhakti Yoga is the art, science, and culture of spiritual relationships. By renovating our relationship with Krishna, the Supreme Spirit, we can naturally have satisfying, meaningful relationships with all other living beings, because all other living beings are parts and parcels of Krishna, the Supreme Spirit. Again, Krishna states here that this knowledge is what he calls pratyaksha avagamam. So pratyaksha means sense perception or experience, and avagamam means understood. In other words, this knowledge is understood by one's direct experience. It's not something that we just hope is true. It's something that we can know is true. It's not a belief system, it's an action system. That's one reason that the Bhagavad Gita is spoken on a battlefield in between two armies who are just about to fight. Can you think of a more active place? This is indicating that Bhagavad Gita is meant to be applied. And when we do apply it, we get pratyaksha. We get direct experience of this knowledge. Krishna also explains that the faithless, or those who don't apply the knowledge, again, this is not referring to someone who doesn't believe the knowledge, this is referring to someone who doesn't apply the knowledge. For such a person, they can't attain Krishna. They remain in the cycle of repeated birth and death. The next key point we get is Krishna's relationship with the material world. So Krishna, through his material energy, he pervades the entire cosmic manifestation. He also creates and annihilates the cosmic manifestation through that material energy. And although he's the supreme director of everything that happens in this world, the material world nevertheless moves independently, and Krishna remains neutral and detached. Srila Prabhupada gives an example in his purport to text 4. He says, for example, a king heads a government which is but the manifestation of the king's energy. The different governmental departments are nothing but the energies of the king, and each department is resting on the king's power. But still, one cannot expect the king to be present in every department personally. That is a crude example. Similarly, all the manifestations that we see and everything that exists, both in this material world and in the spiritual world, are resting on the energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So Krishna is directing everything, but at the same time he's detached. The next key point we get is different types of worshippers of Krishna. At the beginning of this section, Krishna explains that those who are under the influence of his illusory energy consider him an ordinary human being when he appears in a human-like form. And the result of that misperception of Krishna is that such persons are actually defeated in all their endeavors. Then he goes on to explain, though, that pure bhakti yogis, being under the influence of the internal energy, and thus free from illusion, know that although he appears in a human-like form, actually his form is eternal, it's spiritual, it's transcendental to all forms of matter. Remember, Krishna explained this in the 4th chapter, that he appears in his own eternal form, which is inexhaustible. And therefore, Such people worship Krishna with an undeviating mind, knowing him to be the Supreme Personality of Godhead. We then hear about three kinds of indirect worshippers of Krishna. So they do worship Krishna, but not in the right way. They worship him indirectly. So we have those who worship the universe as the form of the Supreme, those who worship different demigods or higher beings as the Supreme, and then those who worship themselves as the Supreme. So again, these people are worshipping Krishna in various forms, but they're doing it in an unauthorized way. And Krishna explains that worshippers of other deities, they do actually worship him, but in a misdirected way, and therefore they achieve the abodes of the object of their worship. But for pure bhakti yogis who focus on Krishna exclusively, knowing him to be the Supreme Personality of Godhead, for them, he personally brings and preserves their spiritual advancement, and ultimately they attain his supreme abode. The final point here in the chapter is the glories of pure Bhakti Yoga. Krishna explains that Bhakti Yoga is simple. It's not complicated at all, like so many other forms of yoga or meditation. Krishna explains here that he accepts even very small or apparently insignificant offerings when accompanied by sincere devotion. He says even if one offers a leaf, a flower, a fruit, or water, he will accept it if it's offered with love and devotion. That's how simple Bhakti Yoga is. And he explains that one who can't worship him constantly with pure love can gradually attain that platform by offering the results of his work to Krishna. So we all work in some kind of way in this world, and we get some kind of results from our work. We get money, we get skills, and we can offer those results to Krishna or to Krishna's mission in this world, either all of them or some of them. And in this way, we can gradually attain the platform of pure Bhakti Yoga, in which one offers one's life to Krishna and then just acts according to Krishna's desire. Krishna explains in this section that he's equal to all. He says, I'm equal to all living beings. I have no favorites. I don't specifically like anybody, nor do I specifically dislike anybody. But at the same time, I am especially inclined to my pure devotee. In other words, because the pure devotee has given everything to me, then I'm especially inclined to that person. And even if such a person makes a mistake on the spiritual path, due to the strong power of material connections, we're talking about an accidental mistake here, then Krishna explains that he excuses the devotee from that, and the devotee is to be considered glorious, even though they have made an accidental mistake on the spiritual path. He explains that everyone, regardless of their material situation, can practice the simple and natural process of bhakti, because all that's required is sincerity. That's the real essence of bhakti. Sincerity to want to love and serve the Supreme. So we may be in various material circumstances. Someone's in a high material position, someone's in a low material position, someone's in the middle. But as long as we have sincerity to love and serve the Supreme, we can make progress, genuine progress in our spiritual life. Because sincerity is all that is required. So Krishna summarizes the simple and natural process of Bhakti Yoga in the final text. He says, engage your mind always in thinking of me, become my devotee, offer obeisances to me, and worship me. Being completely absorbed in me, surely you will come to me. An interesting thing about this verse is that it's situated exactly in the middle of the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita has 18 chapters, and this is the final text at the end of the 9th chapter. So it's directly in the middle of the Bhagavad Gita, indicating it's the essence of the Gita's instructions. Krishna has explained this most confidential knowledge in 4 simple statements: engaging the mind always in thinking of him, becoming his devotee, offering obeisances to him, and worshipping him. What will be the result? The practitioner who follows these simple methods will be completely absorbed in Krishna, and the result of that will be, as he says here, surely you will come to me. So Krishna is reconfirming what he explained in the previous chapter. So this is the essence of the Bhagavad Gita, and this verse is also repeated to emphasize the essence of the Gita at the end of the 18th chapter, the final chapter. So let's summarize this chapter, the most confidential knowledge. In this chapter we've heard Krishna glorify the most confidential knowledge of Bhakti Yoga, or the activities of the spirit soul in perfection, as a spiritual science that relieves a non-envious person from the miseries of material existence. He has explained it to be the king of education, the most secret of all secrets, the purest knowledge, the perfection of religion due to giving direct experience of our spiritual identity. He's explained it's eternal and joyfully performed. He's explained his relationship with the material world, that he's the supreme director but remains neutral and detached. We've heard how foolish people consider him an ordinary person because he appears in a human-like form, while those who actually understand Krishna, who are free from all illusion, being under the influence of his internal energy, worship him with an undeviated mind. We've heard about different types of worshippers of Krishna, the direct worshippers and the indirect worshippers, and the glories of pure Bhakti Yoga, which is simple and easy to perform, and which leads to complete absorption in Krishna and ultimately to his personal association. Srila Prabhupada concludes his final purport to this chapter by saying, therefore, the intelligent person should take directly to the process of Krishna consciousness and happily live in this material world. He will eventually receive the supreme award of Krishna. Let's preview Chapter 10. Chapter 10 is entitled The Opulence of the Absolute. At the end of Chapter 9, Krishna has explained the glories of Bhakti Yoga, or devotional service. To generate more devotion in his devotee, he therefore explains his opulences in Chapter 10. Thank you so much for your good company in this class on Chapter 9, the most confidential knowledge, and I look forward to seeing you in Chapter 10, the opulence of the Absolute.